The story begins with the view of a great mansion. A handsome boy with light hair and butler-like looks seems to be the protagonist. He knocks on the door and calls out the name of Miss Eleanor, telling her that he is about to enter. Upon entering the room, a pretty dark-haired girl throws herself toward him, asking the boy, whose name is Arx, where he had been. The protagonist explains that he was reincarnated as a background character in an autumn genre video game, and that somehow the Yandere villainess had just fallen head over heels for him. Once this introduction scene concludes, the context of the story begins to be explained. Celestia Kingdom is an autumn game that became extremely popular in Japan thanks to its many possible endings. Among so many characters, Eleanor was very infamous for committing outrageous and horrible misdeeds. In this context, Arx Leafort, the protagonist, never appears nor is ever mentioned by name in any of the story branches. In short, he was just a background character with no relevant role, what is commonly referred to as an NPC in video games. Despite this, he is not bothered by being a mere filler character. When it comes to reincarnating in an autumn game world, the standard formula is to become invincible by using the knowledge from your past life. This makes you gain attraction from girls and become strong. However, the problem is that Arx barely remembers anything from his past life since he has no memories. He explains that it may be due to the rules of the world he is in. Even so, the only thing he remembers is that he lived in Japan. For now, he has no family or relatives in this world. He is simply living without trouble in the orphanage where he was taken in. Still, he seriously wonders why he was reincarnated in a place like this, since if he were the main character, then he could use some amazing magic, or perhaps live the experience of a school life with other characters. Despite this, Arx believes that at some point he will have a great opportunity, even for a background character with no powers like him. So he will enjoy this new world for now. The next day, Arx is found practicing with wooden swords. He easily defeats his opponent in a fight, who is someone from the village. The rival falls to the ground defeated and tells him that he is very good and surrenders. Everyone in the village praises Arx for his skill with the sword since he has managed to defeat all the adults of the village. A village child approaches him and tells him that he is very amazing, asking him if by training a lot someday he will be able to be as strong as him. Arx, with a laugh, tells him that of course he will achieve it, giving the boy encouragement. Nevertheless, in Arx's mind, he thinks that he was only training out of boredom since there are no online games in this world. So out of mere boredom, he managed to become very strong with the sword. Thanks to this, he could easily defeat all the adults of the village. Even so, he believes it is not a big deal, nor that he will become some knight or something. At best, this will serve him to get rid of monsters that come close to the village. Suddenly, the director of the orphanage, a kind man with a gentle personality, congratulates Arx for his skill and applauds him. He tells him that he is sure that someday he will become a great knight and caresses his hair, showing affection for him. Arx asks him if an ordinary person like him could become a knight, and the director replies that indeed someone as strong and intelligent as him will manage to become one. Then the director tells him that he has a favor to ask of him, leaving the protagonist intrigued. The scene quickly changes to Arx nervous, and with his heart beating fast in a luxurious mansion. The boy asks the director if he is sure they can be in a place like this since he feels out of place for a villager like him. But the director emphasizes that there is someone who truly wishes to see him. The door opens and a tall man with a wealthy appearance enters the room. He apologizes for being a little late and introduces himself as Adalbert Ancinous, being the count who governs the region. Arx is impressed by his title and nervously introduces himself as well. Adalbert asks if he is the boy they had spoken of, and the director confirms it, commenting that Arx is a very capable boy. Adalbert tells Arx that he has heard of his achievements and has an important favor to ask him. With a serious yet gentle tone of voice, the count asks him to become none other than the friend of his daughter. Arx is shocked by the surprise. He cannot believe that this count had summoned a mere orphan just to be his daughter's friend. The count mentions that the truth is that his daughter possesses a problematic nature. Arx believes at first that maybe it is an illness or a hateful personality. The count ushered in his daughter, who revealed herself to be a strikingly beautiful young woman with delicate features, her flowing dark hair and somber dress accentuating her elegance. She introduced herself as Eleanor Ancinous. The moment Arx heard her name, realization struck him. This was none other than the infamous Eleanor from the game, the very girl known for committing dreadful deeds and cursing everyone she encountered. She was the villainess who relentlessly tormented the game's protagonist with malice, the very root of all evil and the final boss. Even so, Arx could not help but question whether it was wise to befriend someone as fearsome as her. The Count brought the two closer and expressed his certainty that they would grow to be good friends, encouraging them to take a stroll in the garden and spend some time together. The next scene showed them walking along the paths outside, where Eleanor remarked that her father had been right, the garden was breathtakingly beautiful, and no matter how long she gazed at it, she never grew bored. Yet, Arx could not shake the unease within him. He recalled that the Count had mentioned she was his age, but it baffled him how someone like her could remain so expressionless. Still, he could not deny her beauty. In truth, she was captivating. Never before had he seen a girl clothed entirely in black, with eyes and hair just as dark, who radiated such allure. Even her lack of expression did little to diminish the spell her beauty cast over him. As they continued their walk, Eleanor suddenly stopped in her tracks, startling Arx. Concerned, he asked if something was wrong. Seeing her so silent and strange, he suggested they return to the mansion if she was feeling unwell. But with a cold, unreadable gaze, she told him that, just as she had suspected, he had no desire to be her friend, leaving Arx unsettled and confused. She then revealed that she understood everything. The reason, she deduced, was simple. He did not wish to associate with someone as cursed as her. Everyone felt the same, and she accepted that he, too, wished only to distance himself. Memories flooded in scenes of her being shunned by society, whispers of how everything she touched became tainted, how best it was to avoid her. Cruel remarks about her appearance had haunted her as well, that her eyes held no light, that she was always dressed in black. She explained that some tolerated her existence merely because she was a noble's daughter. Yet in time, no one spoke to her at all. All she received were glares filled with hatred and disdain. Arx was struck silent. Shaken by her words, she confessed that she had grown accustomed to such treatment, as it was the only way people ever reacted to her. Then, without warning, she demonstrated her magic upon a cluster of plants. Arx, stunned by the sight, realized that this was Eleanor's power, but one unlike anything he had ever seen. She held a wilted flower and told him to witness for himself. Before his eyes, its color drained further, shriveling into lifelessness. Everything she touched, she explained, withered and died, not only plants, but people as well. Meeting his gaze with an unflinching stare, she declared this to be her true nature. And now he could finally understand. Arx stood deep in thought, grappling with the revelation. He had never imagined she bore such a burden. Yet he could not help but wonder if he could save her, or if he could alter her fate. Slowly, he began to believe that perhaps this was the very reason he had been brought into this world. If he could change the course of the story and stay by her side, then maybe the world could achieve a happy ending, one free of the tragic fate he knew awaited her. With newfound resolve, Arx's determination solidified. He realized he must strive toward a future where no one was left unhappy, a future where even Eleanor would not have to suffer. He told Eleanor that, to him, she was not ugly in the slightest, quite the opposite. She was breathtakingly beautiful. His words left her cheeks flushed with a deep blush. Nervously, she admitted that while she appreciated his kindness, she knew her powers could still harm others. Arx acknowledged that risk, but insisted there had to be a better way for her abilities to be used. Reaching out, he touched the withered flower, and before their eyes it blossomed back to life. Finally, he assured her that even if she did hurt someone, he would find a way to set things right. With sincerity in his voice and determination in his heart, he asked her to accept his hand in friendship. In the next chapter, it begins with Eleanor being subjected to cruel discrimination. Harsh comments echoing before everyone's eyes, some calling her a crow, others a demon. Suddenly, the distant image of her mother appears, standing before her daughter yet staring at her with severity. She coldly tells her to stop looking at her with those eyes, revealing the hatred and icy disdain she feels toward her own child. Eleanor's heart sinks, and she begins to weep, begging forgiveness simply for having been born. At last, she awakens from this nightmare thanks to Arx, who gently asks if she is all right, for he had the impression that she was trapped in a terrible dream. He explains that they had been speaking comfortably in her room when, overcome by exhaustion, she had suddenly fallen asleep, which must have been the cause of her nightmare. Without a word, Eleanor looks at Arx, and then breaks down in inconsolable tears, crying like a small child. Arx grows uneasy in the face of such raw emotions, uncertain of how to respond to the feelings of a girl, so he simply decides to embrace her, giving her soft pats as if to soothe her distress. Gradually, she calms down, and in that fragile moment she comes to understand that now, at last, she has a friend she can trust. Previously, she, downcast, mentioned that if he stayed with her, he would end up unhappy, but he told her it was the complete opposite. Since being with her would bring him great happiness, he told her that perhaps being together would eventually cause her to hurt him. But Arx replied that no one in this life leaves without having hurt someone, and that such a thing is normal. Faced with so much negativity from her, Eleanor was suddenly held by Arx, who tightly embraced her and told her that he only wanted her, leaving her deeply astonished. Returning to the present, she apologized for having cried because of the nightmare, but he told her not to apologize, since his chest would always be there for her whenever she needed it, and she laughed softly, thanking him. To this, he simply replied that it was only what any friend would do. She then opened her heart to him, admitting that she had never had anyone she could call an ally, let alone a friend, which is why it was difficult for her to believe she truly had someone like Arx by her side. Arx told her that such a feeling was normal, that friendship could take many forms, and that he was only doing what he felt was right. He explained that if she made more friends in the future, she would come to see that it was nothing but a natural feeling. Finally, he told her that communication required practice and repetition, and that they should take things slowly, since, in the end, life was much longer than either of them imagined. After this heartfelt speech from Arx, a few weeks passed, and her attitude began to change. As he now understood her true nature, she had become very intense, constantly demanding his attention. At one point she became upset because he was not listening to her. Yet to him these gestures were nothing but endearing. He apologized, explaining that he had simply been lost in thought, and she irritably asked if there was anything more important than her question. He gently took her hand and, in a tender voice, told her that of course there was nothing more important to him than her. This made her blush furiously, smoke metaphorically rising from her embarrassment. Arx, inwardly amused, joked with himself that he was too handsome, and therefore able to take advantage of such a quality. Her mood softened, and she asked him which clothes would suit her best. But just as he tried to think of an answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was her father, Lord Adalbert, asking Arx if he had a moment to speak with him. He apologized to his daughter, explaining that he needed to borrow her friend for a short while. But, as expected, she wore a very angry expression. With her usual tsundere attitude, she told him she didn't care, since Arx had already been distracted and wasn't paying her any attention anyway. Trying to persuade her, Arx turned back and whispered delicately in her ear that whatever clothes she wore would always look beautiful on her, no matter what, making her blush even more. The Count then explained to Arx that the request he had made was approved, and that starting next week, he would officially become a member of the household as a butler. Arx thanked him deeply for this, yet the Count asked if he was truly comfortable with the arrangement. Arx replied that he was, since it saved him the trouble of traveling back and forth, and he was also grateful to have a job. Hearing this, the Count was impressed by the remarkable capability of a boy as young as 7 years old. Finding him truly admirable, he told Arx that this was precisely the reason why he had chosen him to be his daughter's friend, and Arx firmly confirmed it. Finally, Arx left the room with eager anticipation, ready to take on his new role. Meanwhile, Eleanor impatiently waited for him, and through the crack of the door he noticed that she was still sulking. He called her name, but she furiously reproached him for taking so long as she thinks he was having so much fun with his dad talking to him. Arx, now dressed in his new butler attire, apologized respectfully, addressing her as Milady. Kneeling before her with knightly courtesy, he solemnly declared that from that moment on, she should allow him to serve her as her devoted assistant. The mansion, usually a place of quiet dignity, had been transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying trays, decorations, and fine silks. Among them worked Arx, moving briskly as he coordinated with the maids. His movements were efficient yet rushed. The task of readying the estate for such an occasion was exhausting, but his determination never faltered. In the next moment, a shift in time is revealed. 3 years had passed since Ark first entered the household as a mere child servant. Now at only 10 years old, he carried himself with a composure far beyond his age. What made the moment more striking was that Eleanor herself was soon to reach her 10th birthday, a milestone that in this world was celebrated with all the grandeur befitting nobility. 10 was not simply a number here, it was a passage, a recognition of growth, and families of status spared no expense to mark such an occasion. Everyone in the household had been swept into the fervor of preparation. Ark, however, quietly admitted to himself that this would be his very first time attending a noble's banquet, and the thought stirred a rare unease within him. While he adjusted a set of ornaments on a banquet table, a cheerful voice broke through the flurry of tasks. A maid approached, her face warm with gratitude, and she was Nanai, a bright girl who often assisted him in the busier hours of the day. She thanked Ark earnestly for his tireless efforts, telling him that it was because of his guidance that everything was now fully prepared for tomorrow's grand celebration. Ark responded with modesty, explaining inwardly that despite being only 10 years old, he was somehow already overseeing the orchestration of an entire noble gathering. Most of what he contributed were simple, practical suggestions carried over from the knowledge of his previous life, things he considered common sense. And yet to those around him, each instruction seemed ingenious, a mark of intelligence far beyond his years. Their praises embarrassed him, but he accepted them with quiet grace, knowing that none of this was truly for himself. It was all for Eleanor. This was to be her first extravagant party since their meeting, and Ark wished above all to see her smile radiant with delight. For that, he was willing to endure any fatigue. Later, when the final preparations were settled, Ark retreated to the training grounds. Drawing upon his innate talent, he conjured a blade of stone, its surface rough yet sharp, and set about his exercises. His strikes echoed across the courtyard until his arms trembled with exhaustion. Rather than rest conventionally, he restored himself with a surge of magic, a display that left Nanai had secretly followed to watch utterly astonished. Once satisfied with his practice, Ark decided to call it a day. But just as he was about to leave, a soft, familiar voice reached his ears. Turning, he saw Eleanor standing nearby, her figure framed by the evening light. She confessed she had been waiting for some time, though he had not noticed her presence. Concern flickered in his eyes, and he scolded her gently, warning that she could catch a cold out here. To this, she answered with a mischievous smirk, saying that if she did, he would simply have to warm her himself. There was a pause between them, heavy yet tender, before she accused him of being far too busy lately. He countered calmly, reminding her that they had only spoken just the other day. Suspecting that she was exaggerating, she huffed, muttering half to herself that he belonged to her before quickly correcting her words, declaring instead that as her servant, he was obliged to remain constantly by her side. Ark apologized sincerely, explaining that his busyness was all for her sake, for tomorrow's grand celebration. Hearing this, her expression softened. She admitted the importance of the day, conceding that it could not be helped, though a faint trace of dissatisfaction lingered in her gaze. As they began walking back to the mansion together, she suddenly asked if he ever felt lonely. The question caught him off guard. Ark shook his head, explaining with honesty that he never felt alone, for Lord Adalbert and the other servants had always treated him kindly. At his words, Eleanor's mood shifted sharply. A jealous glint lit her eyes, her lips tightening as though his contentment with others unsettled her in ways she herself could not explain. Before Ark could notice fully, she turned away, masking her emotions beneath a fragile facade. Finally, a small sneeze escaped her, revealing the cost of her stubbornness in lingering outside. With a sigh, Ark guided her back, silently vowing to ensure she would be well for tomorrow. The day of the celebration dawned at last. The mansion's grand hall sparkled with chandeliers and gilded decorations, its walls alive with the murmur of noble guests. Lord Adalbert, standing tall and dignified, welcomed the gathering, his voice carrying through the chamber with practiced authority. Yet when he leaned toward Ark, his words grew sharp and commanding. He ordered the boy to keep his eyes open and to eliminate anyone who dared draw too close to his daughter. Ark nodded without hesitation, his youthful face set with rare steel. As the evening unfolded, he noticed two figures lingering near the edge of the hall, their movements suspicious, and their eyes scanning Eleanor with unnerving focus. Arx's gaze locked onto them, sharp and unyielding. But when they realized he had marked them, unease flickered across their faces. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the two men vanished into the crowd as though swallowed by shadows, leaving Arx with the chilling certainty that danger was nearer than anyone realized. At last, the birthday girl made her entrance. Eleanor appeared at the top of the staircase, her figure framed by the soft glow of chandeliers. She wore a dress of delicate black silk embroidered with silver threads that shimmered as she moved. The transformation left Arx momentarily breathless. She looked radiant, almost otherworldly, and he could hardly believe this was the same gloomy, withdrawn girl he had met 3 years ago. Her once expressionless face now carried a quiet dignity, her beauty undeniable, and for a brief moment the entire hall seemed to fall into silence as every guest turned to stare at her. Arx thought to himself how incredible it was that a child could grow and change so much in just a few short years. Yet he forced his composure to remain intact, reminding himself that his duty today was not to indulge in admiration, but to oversee the smooth flow of the event. His thoughts were interrupted by Nanai, who approached him and whispered that he had been summoned. Eleanor was calling for him to take his place as her guard for the evening. Arx frowned slightly at the request, sensing it was less about duty and more about her insistence on keeping him close. As he stepped forward, he became acutely aware of the weight of countless eyes on him. The nobles in the hall whispered among themselves, their stares sharp and prying, as though trying to pierce through his very being. Their gazes asked a silent question: who was this boy, and why was he standing so close to the young lady of the house? Eleanor broke the silence with her characteristic bluntness. She declared that Arx was her attendant, though she pointed out with irritation that he was rarely by her side. One of the nobles scoffed that there was no need for a mere servant to sit next to the main guest of honor. But Eleanor's eyes flashed, and with an uncharacteristic boldness, she raised her voice, insisting that Arx was not just any servant. Then, with a sudden and heartfelt announcement, she revealed something that startled the crowd: that today was not only her birthday, but Arx as well. They were the same age, yet unlike her, his birthday had never been celebrated. Her words rang through the hall, catching Arx off guard. A warmth spread through his chest as he muttered his thanks, his cheeks burning faintly at her unexpected kindness. He realized then just how much she had changed from the pessimistic, self-loathing girl of the past, and the thought filled him with both pride and a quiet affection. But even in this touching moment, Arx's sharp eyes remained vigilant. Out of the corner of his vision, he noticed something that made his heart tighten: the same two suspicious men from earlier. They had reappeared, and though the crowd masked them, there was one with lips curled into a mischievous, unsettling smile. Almost immediately, one of the young nobles steps forward, addressing the girl respectfully as the count's daughter and inviting her to dance. Arx watches silently, and for an instant, it is as though a scene from a game flashes through his mind. Recognition strikes him. That face, he has seen it before. The young man introduces himself as Razor, son of the Viscount. Only then does Arx understand why he did not recognize him sooner. Razor is far younger than he will be when the game's story begins. He recalls the boy's sharp tongue and arrogant demeanor, yet also his fierce loyalty to the protagonist, a contrast that made him a beloved character later on. Razor insists once more, asking if the young lady did not hear his invitation. At that moment, Arx realizes with surprise that the boy standing before them is one of the kingdom's romance targets. The count's daughter repeats his words thoughtfully, as though weighing her option. Then, after a brief pause, she makes up her mind. With a calm and decisive tone, she declares that she understands, and coldly refuses his offer. The rejection leaves Razor stunned. His expression quickly twists into indignation as he demands to know the reason for her refusal. However, she simply replies that she has no intention or desire to dance with him. Before the situation can escalate further, Arx steps forward, placing himself between them in a swift, protective motion. Razor glares at him furiously, shouting that a mere servant has no right to interfere. Yet Arx remains composed and introduces himself as the attendant of the count's daughter. He explains firmly that it is his duty to protect her, and that he is only fulfilling that obligation. His calm defiance provokes a look of disgust from Razor. At that point, the Viscount's companion intervenes. He accuses Razor of overreacting and urges him to calm down, reminding him that causing a public scene will only tarnish his family's reputation. Razor protests, claiming that he merely invited her to dance, but his friend insists that if he harms a noblewoman or her servant, the consequences could be disastrous. Arx watches the exchange in silence, thinking that although Razor is not foolish, he is still immature and impulsive. Meanwhile, the companion promises not to inform the Viscount of the incident if Razor steps back now. With an arrogant smile, Razor pretends to concede, but in the next instant, he seizes Arx's hand and, with startling strength, throws him backward. Arx hits the ground hard, momentarily stunned. Razor shouts in fury, demanding to know how he dares to humiliate him. Still lying on the floor, Arx reflects quietly on how troublesome a noble's pride can be. Then, reaching toward Razor's companion, he utters a single word, "Sleep." Instantly, the young man collapses, falling unconscious against Arx's shoulder. Holding the boy carefully, Arx instructs the Count's daughter to call for her master. Alarmed, she rushes to his side, concern written all over her face. Arx smiles faintly and asks if she is unharmed. Gently, she touches his cheek and tells him not to worry about her, but to think of himself first. She notices the swelling in his abdomen, but Arx dismisses it as nothing serious. The young woman exhales in relief, grateful that he is safe. Later, while Arx quietly serves drinks at the gathering, another guest approaches, noticing his distant and somber expression, and asks if everything is all right. Meanwhile, in a private room of the mansion, tension fills the air. Razor's older brother bows deeply, apologizing and lamenting that his younger sibling has already caused such serious trouble. Arx reacts with surprise at the sight of a noble lowering his head and hurriedly insists that there is no need. He recognizes the man, Caesar, another of the kingdom's romance targets. With a composed and princely demeanor, Caesar offers a sincere apology. He admits that managing his younger brother is often difficult and explains that Razor was spoiled from a young age, growing up with the habit of always getting what he wanted. Internally, Arx observes that Razor behaves like an elementary school child, though he quickly reminds himself that the boy truly is that age in this timeline. Caesar sighs and concludes that the entire incident likely began because someone advised his brother that if he liked a girl, he should simply invite her to dance. As the attendant gazes at the boy sleeping soundly, he finally asks what will become of Razor. The older brother sighs and answers that, although the final decision lies with the Count, exile will most likely be inevitable. Hearing that word, Arx clears his throat, intrigued. The term exile, something that usually exists only in fantasy tales, suddenly feels real in this world. Reflecting for a moment, he realizes that even though these children are only around 10 years old, they are already considered adults in this society. In a way, it makes sense, given the world's harsh and noble customs. Still, the thought that one of the romance targets, Viscount Razor, has now vanished from the stage of events unsettles him. He wonders whether the world itself is beginning to drift away from the main storyline of the game. Deep down, he hopes that if the plot is truly changing, then perhaps fate itself can also be rewritten. Just then, the young lady approaches him, softly calling his name. Noticing that he took a while to return, she asks if he is all right. Arx smiles gently and reassures her, explaining that he truly is fine. He adds that his delay was because he was waiting for an apology. After all, there had been witnesses to what happened. Then, with a slight bow, he apologizes as well, regretting that the incident ended up spoiling her special birthday celebration. The young noblewoman reacts with indignation, exclaiming that they have no reason to apologize when the true culprit is that arrogant fool. Yet, after a brief silence, she admits that part of the blame also lies with her. She should have been more cautious and prevented things from getting that far. Hearing her words, Arx lowers his gaze. Inwardly, he reproaches himself, thinking that if he had been more attentive or reviewed the guest list beforehand, he could have avoided the entire situation. The young lady looks at him quietly, sadness flickering in her eyes, and softly utters his name. Then, without warning, she reaches out and gently cups his face between her hands, The sudden tenderness of her touch leaves Arx completely frozen, his thoughts scattered, as warmth spreads through him in silence. At that moment, Eleanor intensely declared that as long as she had Arx, she didn't care about anyone else. Upon hearing such a confession, Arx immediately reacted with an exclamation of surprise. Then, Eleanor commented, regarding the issue of being ruined, that they still weren't certain about it. As the boy walked toward the doors, he once again expressed his surprise, and it was then that Eleanor cautiously asked him if they could step outside for a moment. Once outside, Arx asked Eleanor if she had danced with anyone. Without hesitation, she confirmed that she hadn't danced, which surprised Arx once again. Eleanor then revealed that she had turned down all the invitations. This revelation left Arx perplexed, and he quickly asked her why she would do such a thing, reminding her that dancing was an essential custom among nobles, and that the main purpose of the event was to meet interesting people and make connections. It was then that Eleanor confessed she wanted her first time dancing to be with Arx. She went on to explain that she had actually wanted to invite him the day before, but didn't have the courage to do so. Upon hearing this, Arx asked if she meant inviting him specifically. Arx exclaimed in surprise, and upon realizing the situation, understood that this was why she had acted strangely the previous day. In that moment, Arx asked Eleanor if she truly wanted to dance with him. She told him that she had never danced before and wasn't very good at it. Then she added something else. Eleanor smiled and assured him that even the moon was hiding, so no one could see them there. At that, Arx asked if she was serious. Eleanor reassured him that even if he fell, she would be the only one to see it. Smiling, Arx said that even if he wasn't a good dancer, he wasn't going to be embarrassed by it. Then, Eleanor formally asked Arx Fort Sama if he would take her hand, to which Arx solemnly replied that it would be an honor for him. Later, inside the mansion, several men approached Arx and asked how he would feel about becoming a servant in their respective households. They even promised to pay him whatever he wished, as they wanted him to work for them. Arx reacted with great surprise at such an unexpected offer. However, the nobles continued praising him, saying his firm demeanor in calming the son of the Kilman family had been truly extraordinary and admirable. They added that they wanted to hire him for his precision and magical skill. In response, Arx murmured that he now understood, and that this was the reason behind their insistence. He then asked them to calm down, but upon seeing that Eleanor was with some nobles, he immediately excused himself and declared that, after all, he was the servant of Eleanor Sama. He quickly made his way to Eleanor's side, and upon seeing this, the nobles immediately left, leaving the two of them alone. Seeing this, Eleanor simply smiled at him warmly, and so, the long birthday party came to an end. Arx then thought that he could finally relax, though he quickly corrected himself, remembering that a party always involved both preparation and cleanup. Because of this, Arx wondered if he would be able to finish his tasks before the end of the day and hoped that next time he would be assigned an easier role. At that moment, someone knocked on the door, calling out for Arx-kun. A maid appeared, smiling, and exclaimed that the cleaning crew for the event area had already finished. She also asked whether Nana-sen had finished washing the dishes. Confused, Arx asked if they meant him, to which the maid replied affirmatively. She also mentioned that everyone had been motivated after seeing Arx-kun's effort. In response, Arx said that he wasn't exactly sure why, but he felt a little embarrassed. Then he realized that this was the reason why they had finished cleaning so quickly. The maid added that it seemed Eleanor had also enjoyed herself, and that therefore, his hard work had not been in vain. Arx replied that he was sure of that as well. Shortly after, with a melancholic tone, the maid confessed to Arx that she didn't know why, but every time she saw him, she remembered the past. Arx asked if she meant the past, and then she told him that, a long time ago, when they were children, she had organized a birthday party for her childhood friend when he turned 10 years old. The maid continued explaining that the two of them were orphans, so the party had been very modest, and that all she wanted was to make him happy, even if only a little. She finally concluded that yes, whenever she saw Arx-kun, she pictured herself back then. At that moment, someone commented that Arx and Eliana really seemed like childhood friends, clearly referring to the two of them. Confused, Arx asked if they meant childhood friends. The maid smiled and said that was why she felt a bit nostalgic. Arx began to wonder what was going on. He reflected that, to begin with, his very existence was already irregular, so he supposed it was natural, though he couldn't help but feel that something was strange. Meanwhile, another servant asked if Arx-kun was there. The maid Nana told the servant who was calling to come over for a moment. Noticing some uneasiness, Arx asked Nana if she was all right, adding that he had just been thinking about a few things, though he did seem somewhat distracted, visibly unsettled. Nana told Arx that he must surely be tired and asked him, please, to get some rest soon, as Arx prepared to leave. He said, yes, and thought that he also had to finish his work, even though he felt so sleepy. Nana told Arx that she, too, would do her best a little longer. At that moment, Arx reacted with great distress, thinking that this was very, very bad, suddenly realizing that he had fallen asleep. The narration stated that afterward, Arx was lying on the floor, exhausted. It was then that Eleanor, with an angry expression, exclaimed that he really had to come, and reminded him that she had told him to do so after finishing the cleaning. Arx thought that this might mean a week of her being upset. At that moment, Arx was in the Great Hall, thinking that maybe it had all just been his imagination. He then knocked on the door, identifying himself as Arx and apologizing for being late. Eleanor-sama. He thought she was probably already asleep, that he didn't want to wake her, and that it would be better to apologize in the morning. Suddenly, Arx felt a dark force beneath his feet, which immediately dragged him in and threw him into the room, making him fall seated on the floor. Shocked, Arx asked what that was and what had just happened, unable to avoid panicking. As he looked around, Arx murmured Eleanor's name, and then urgently called out to her. Arx wondered where Eleanor was and whether she was safe. He thought that his body wouldn't move, that this was very bad, and that he had to get up, all while a dark shadow was attacking him. Then, Eleanor appeared with her hair down and dressed in white, and spoke Arx's name. Arx reacted with an exclamation of surprise or confusion. Eleanor-sama was surrounded by shadows, and Arx, still shocked, asked with concern, Eleanor-sama. Arx watched in surprise as Eleanor appeared mysteriously, surrounded by a dark energy that slowly spread across the floor. He was shocked, and his voice barely managed to speak her name. She stared at him intently, her expression serious and distant. However, in that moment, Eleanor firmly said his name, her tone dry and direct. Then, she calmly scolded him, reminding him that he had arrived late. Without losing that expression that mixed annoyance and protectiveness, she pointed out that he had been working non-stop and that he had barely eaten. Then, with a sudden change of mood, Eleanor enthusiastically announced that she had made special sweets, extra ones, just for him. She raised her voice joyfully and told him to eat them. Faced with this, Arx couldn't help but be surprised. Still, he hesitated for a moment. He thought that if he ate sweets at that hour, Nanai-san would scold him. At that moment, Eleanor took one of the sweets and proposed something simple, that he consider her his accomplice. Blushing, she brought a sweet close to Arx's mouth. Face to face, they shared an unexpected moment. Arx then remembered the times when he used to feed her by hand. In his mind, the same question echoed, how had they come to this? How had all of that even happened? Suddenly, Eleanor handed him the sweet. Arx jumped and asked what that was. She responded with unexpected calm, saying that it was still his birthday, so it was okay. Upon hearing this, Arx couldn't help but look at her intently. He insisted on knowing what kind of magic she had used, what exactly she had just done. At his words, Eleanor lowered her gaze, head bowed, and didn't respond directly. Instead, she asked if she could make him some tea. He agreed immediately, without hesitation. As he walked toward the kitchen, the protagonist began to feel a strange presence. Suddenly, a dark magic surrounded him. When he turned, he saw Eleanor still standing in her place, cloaked in dark shadows that wrapped around her like a second skin. Then, she spoke calmly and told him that this was her Celestia. In that moment, Arx remembered what a Celestia was, a magic bestowed upon each person. Every individual received their own unique Celestia, something that could not be shared or copied. It was a defining trait that shaped the world of the game Celestia Kingdom. Then, he asked Eleanor how long it had been. He thought it wasn't as if he didn't know Eleanor's Celestia, at least the one from the game. He had seen countless scenes where she used that same power to commit all sorts of atrocities. Still, despite knowing this, something about it left him uneasy. While pouring the tea, he couldn't stop feeling tense. Eleanor, noticing his unease, told him she was very sorry, that it hadn't been her intention to frighten him. She confessed that when she woke up, the power was already flowing, and she remembered it had started around last month. This surprised Arx, as it had been quite a while. He couldn't understand why she hadn't told him sooner. Eleanor hesitated before answering, but with her head lowered, she explained it was because she was afraid that he would come to hate her. Arx looked at her intently and said that wasn't true. However, at the same time, he couldn't help but admit that seeing it with his own eyes had been terrifying. That was when he finally understood why she was called the Cursed Girl and the enemy of humanity. Eleanor tried to take a more practical approach. She smiled and said that her power was actually useful, since she could carry things around with her. But right after, she couldn't hide her sadness. She remembered what happened when Arx was pushed that day. She said she ended up releasing a bit of her Celestia. Then came the flashback of the protagonist's incident, where Eleanor couldn't help but worry about him and unintentionally activated her Celestia. She also recalled an event from the past, and in that instant, she finally understood something deeper. The shadows enveloped her once more, and she declared that she truly was cursed, that no matter how hard she tried to suppress it, that cursed power continued to stir within her. That's when she thought of Arx and said she was convinced that he too would eventually leave her. At those words, Arx, deeply shaken, reacted immediately and assured her that he would never do that. Then, Eliana remembered a woman. It was her mother. She told him that her mother had spoken those same words before disappearing. Arx, for his part, silently reflected on Eleanor's mother. He mentioned that this maternal figure had never appeared in the story or in that world, and that during all the time Eleanor had lived in the mansion, she had never mentioned her. It was then that a memory from Eleanor's childhood surfaced, a scene in which her mother embraced her. Even though Eleanor couldn't control her magic, her mother still held her in her arms when everyone else rejected her. However, when she turned 5, even her mother disappeared. Eleanor only heard that she had returned to her family's home, so she likely no longer intended to see her again. Arx was completely stunned upon hearing all this. In the memory, little Eleanor had a somber look in her eyes. Then, Arx realized what kind of past she had endured, and there was no doubt she carried emotional scars deep in her heart. In that moment, Eleanor gave a sad smile and told him that it was okay, that it was her fate, after all. Meanwhile, in his thoughts, Arx recognized that he couldn't change the fact that her mother had abandoned her. That was when Eleanor said that she would probably be rejected by anyone. But Arx's hand reached out. He gently held her by the shoulders and called out her name loudly. She opened her eyes in surprise. He looked at her with determination and thought to himself that he wanted to accept her just as she was. In his mind, he reaffirmed something even deeper. He wanted to stop her from falling into darkness. He continued speaking, assuring her that being hated could never be her destiny. He acknowledged that her Celestia might frighten people and that some reckless individuals might reprimand her. Even so, he promised he would keep holding her hand. Then, with a gentle expression, he held her hand tenderly. Eleanor's eyes filled with surprise and emotion. She brought her hands closer to Arx's, and in that moment, silence surrounded them. However, Arx began to sweat, nervous. He thought that maybe he had ruined everything. After all, saying something like that so suddenly would naturally make the other person uncomfortable. For her part, Eleanor thought calmly that she truly had no hope. Arx, confused, reacted upon hearing that statement, but then she smiled sweetly, and a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. Right after, she touched her cheek shyly and confessed that, in truth, she had been waiting for him to say that. Upon hearing it, Arx couldn't help but feel happy. Then, he gently held her face in both hands. With seriousness, he assured her that he would repeat those words as many times as necessary, because he truly meant them. In that instant, they embraced. He closed his eyes softly, and as he did, he thought that all he wanted was to protect her, whether as a friend, a servant, or her childhood companion. But suddenly, he stopped. He wondered why Eliana had fallen into darkness in the main story, and whether that had been solely because of the discrimination she faced since she was a child. Then he understood that that couldn't be the only reason, not after what they had just shared. Eliana lowered her gaze sadly and confessed in a quiet voice that if Arx ever left, she would probably fall apart. Arx reacted with shock to her words, but she spoke again, more seriously this time. She said that just the thought of Arx disappearing gave her a terrifying feeling. He, with a nervous smile, tried to joke. He asked her not to say things like that. But then he clearly remembered he was going to disappear. The open book before him described Eliana's fate. In her childhood, she had been calm and sensitive, but everything changed when she lost a close friend at the hands of a villainous young noble. Arx understood what that meant. If everything remained the same, he would probably die. And that would happen 5 years after the start of the game, before she turned 15. Because of that, Eliana would fall into darkness and become the final boss who tormented everyone. In that moment, Eliana pulled him out of his thoughts. With a broad smile, she asked him to let her believe what he had just told her. Arx replied with a nervous yes. However, deep in his thoughts, he couldn't help but feel guilty, because he was going to betray her. He knew there was something dark inside her, a twisted power that seemed to whisper exactly that. Later on, Arx collapsed to the ground, gasping, completely covered in wounds after an intense training session. Despite his condition, he pleaded for another round. However, Nanai, incredulous at his persistence, warned him that he was covered in cuts. Arx, still breathless, lifted his head and insisted he was fine. His hand rose with determination, gripping his sword firmly, as he declared that there was no time to rest. Only 5 years remained, or perhaps even less, until the great disaster. Inside, Arx was fully resolved as he wielded his sword. By then, he had to have become the strongest. Behind him, the sound of blows echoed from a nearby building. The clash of swords filled the air with noise, and Arx shouted loudly as his blade collided with another. Seeing how agitated he was, Nanai suggested they take a break, though not without teasing him a little first. Still, Arx insisted he was fine and that it wasn't a big deal. In response, Nanai, a bit uncomfortable, scratched his neck, looked away, and clarified that that wasn't what he had meant. From a corner, Eliana watched in silence. That's when Nanai noticed her and told Arx that every time he knocked him down, the young woman's gaze became more frightening. Then, Nanai placed a hand on Arx's shoulder and proposed that they rest for now. Arx agreed, though somewhat reluctantly. At that moment, Eliana began walking toward them with firm steps. Arx quickly ran to meet her and gently asked why she hadn't said anything. She smiled, tucking a hand through her hair, and replied that she hadn't wanted to interrupt while he was working so hard. Later, in a calmer scene, Eliana asked about his lessons with Anai-san, to which Arx replied that they had already finished. Without warning, he was surprised to see Eliana slowly leaning toward him. She smiled and said he was welcome to praise her if he felt like it. Arx was even more surprised by her attitude. However, shortly after, he gently patted her head and told her she was amazing. She responded with a quiet smile. At that moment, Arx fell deep into thought and mentioned that, during the night of the party, he realized something important. He understood that the reason Eliana fell into darkness was the death of her childhood friend, none other than himself. That's why he had been training so hard, solely to prevent that fall. He had believed he'd managed to change the course of the original story, but came to understand that he hadn't changed anything, at least not yet. With his head bowed, Arx couldn't help but feel useless for failing to protect her. The scene showed Eliana cloaked in darkness, with a black stain on her chest. Arx knew perfectly well that if things continued like this, if he died, Eliana would become merciless and heartless. Then, she would die a cruel death as the final boss. That was the one fate Arx wanted to avoid at all costs. With a calm gesture, he stroked Eliana's head. He remembered that he had even considered pushing her away on purpose, making her hate him, but that attempt had failed. That was when Eliana asked him to pet her more properly. Extremely nervous, Arx touched her carefully, giving her soft pats on the head. As he did, he thought that pushing her away might be even more terrifying. Eliana gave a slight smile and, deep inside, thought how happy she was that he had grown fond of her. But in that same moment, Arx drifted into his thoughts. With a serious expression, he said that he didn't want to die either. He pressed his hand firmly against his chest, fully aware that he had no other choice. He had to become the strongest and survive. Eleanor watched him closely, noticing his strange expression. Then she spoke seriously and told him he had been acting a little strange lately. Arx, startled, let out a nervous shout. At the same time, Arx panicked and tried to respond, though he barely managed to stammer a few words. Then, scratching his head and laughing, he attempted to play it off, trying to hide what he was truly feeling in that moment. However, an anguishing thought loomed in his mind. It seemed he was destined to die soon. Because of that, he believed Eleanor would become someone capable of making others suffer. Still, he knew clearly that he could never say such a thing out loud, not even if the situation pushed him to it. Suddenly, someone interrupted his thoughts. A voice pleaded with Eleanor for some support, and before he could fully grasp what was happening, Anai was already holding him by the shoulders with a kind smile. Calmly, Anai explained that Arx simply wanted to show the young woman his best side, and that it was all part of what was called the trial ritual. Arx was left bewildered by these words, not fully understanding the situation. Shortly after, the three of them were speaking outdoors, while Anai casually mentioned how everything had grown colder ever since he turned 10. Ileana reacted with surprise, unable to hide her shock, and immediately called out to Arx in a tone filled with concern. She watched him closely and asked if he was okay. Noticing how pale his face looked, Arx briefly apologized, turned around, and walked away, saying he had just remembered something urgent he needed to take care of. Ileana stayed behind, hesitating, her eyes lowered and her expression sad, unable to say another word. Meanwhile, Arx's steps quickened. In his mind, he could only repeat the same thought. This was bad, really bad. He hurried through a corridor until he reached a door. Feeling the urgency building within him, he scolded himself again and again. How could he have forgotten something so important? Finally, he stopped, head bowed, trapped in growing worry. Then, covering his face with both hands, he froze in horror as he realized that this event was the moment he was most likely to die. It was none other than the dreaded trial ritual. He remembered that the ceremony involved 10-year-old children venturing into a dungeon to test their skill and courage. While safety was supposedly guaranteed, Arx understood all too well that if anything went wrong, that would be the place where he would most likely meet his end. The question of what he should do began to ring loudly within him. Now standing in front of a massive set of double doors, Arx asked himself what he needed to do to survive. After a long sigh, full of frustration, but also determination, he accepted that he had no other option and absolutely refused to die. Without hesitation, he slowly opened the door. While his mind filled with memories, the grueling training alongside Anai, the countless hours spent studying at his desk, and a specific moment when he screamed, surrounded by what seemed to be magical energy. Thus, the day before judgment had finally arrived. From his room, Arx reflected while reading, noting that poisonous creatures were among the dangers to be expected. Later, wearing a worried expression, he acknowledged that he had done everything within his power. Yet the doubt still lingered. Would he die the next day? Sitting by the window, he wished he could at least know how he would die. He thought the whole situation was far too unfair to be real. Seeing his reflection in the glass, he wondered what kind of death would be enough to drive Eleanor into darkness. His hand rested on the window as a silent question overtook him. How had he died? Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Arx and Eleanor walked together through the forest. Knowing they only had to reach the heart of that place, Eleanor moved forward with a slight tremble, so Arx gently took her hand to calm her, assuring her that she didn't need to worry. Then, with determination, he held both of her hands and promised to protect her. Eleanor looked at him, surprised, and asked if he wasn't afraid. Deep inside, Arx admitted the truth. He was terrified. From the moment he realized he was going to die, fear had never left him. Still, he also understood something else. The fear of Eleanor getting hurt was far greater. With a gentle smile and warm voice, he expressed that feeling sincerely. Eleanor, deeply moved by his words, looked at him with wide, shining eyes. Then she grabbed his sleeve with determination, declaring that she would rely on him if needed. Arx watched her in silence, stunned by her words, and then calmly accepted the situation. Though he was sweating and his gaze remained serious, he told himself it was okay, that he had done everything he could. Then, he closed his fist tightly and reminded himself that now, all he had to do was believe in himself. And so, Arx and Eleanor moved forward, walking together down the path that led into the darkness of the forest. With a firm voice, Arx urged them onward, marking the beginning of the trial ritual.